Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to this channel. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. Please, please subscribe to this channel, share, as well as like and drop a comment on the comment section. So today we are continuing with a series on the Palestinian-Israeli crisis, or what you may call the Arab-Israeli crisis. Okay, and today we are going to be looking at, the conflict, you know, series of conflict. We are going to be cataloging the conflict, because you cannot actually begin to analyze the present conflict without having a historical background to it. And that is why it is important for us to actually look at, the history, the historicity, the history or the historical background of this crisis. Okay, now don't forget that after the War of Independence that was fought in 1948, the second war that happened was the Suez Crisis of 1956. Suez Crisis of 1956. Now don't forget that tension mounted again with the rise to power of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, a staunch pan-Arab nationalist. Nasser took a hostile stance, toward Israel. And in 1956, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital waterway connecting Europe and Asia that was largely owned by the French and British concerns. France and Britain responded by striking a deal with Israel, whose ships were barred from using the canal and whose southern part of Eilat had been blockaded by Egypt, wherein Israel would invade Egypt. France and Britain would then intervene ostensibly as peacemakers and take control of the canal. And then in October 1956, Israel invaded Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, and in 5 days, the Israeli army captured Gaza, Rafah, and Al Arish, taking thousands of prisoners, and occupied most of the peninsula east of the Suez Canal. The Israelis were then in a position to open sea communication through the Gulf of Aqaba. In December, after the joint Anglo-French intervention, a UN emergency force was then in a position to open sea communication through the Gulf of Aqaba. That the Israelis were then in the position to open open sea communication through the Gulf of Aqaba. In December, after the joint Anglo-French intervention, a UN emergency force was stationed in the area, and Israeli forces withdrew in March 1957. Though Egyptian forces had been defeated on all fronts, the Suez Crisis, as it is sometimes known, was seen by the Arabs as an Egyptian victory. Egypt dropped the blockade of Eilat. That is, a UN buffer force was placed in Sinai Peninsula. That was actually the first crisis, or the first war that happened after the independence. What is the second war? The second war happened in 1967, and it was called the 6-Day War. What happened during this war? Now, Arab and Israeli forces clashed for the third time. That was June 5 to 10, 1967, in what came to be called the 6-Day War. In early 1967, Syria intensified its bombardment of Israeli villages from positions in the Golan Heights, when the Israeli Air Force shot down 6 Syrian MiG fighter jets in reprisal. Nasser, okay, Nasser mobilized the forces near the Sinai border, dismissing the UN force there, and he again sought to blockade Eilat. In May 1967, Egypt signed a mutual defense pact with Jordan. Okay, Israel answered this apparent Arab rush to war by staging a sudden air assault, destroying Egypt's air force on the ground. The Israeli victory on the ground was also overwhelming. Israeli units drove back the Syrian forces from the Golan Heights, took control of the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and drove Jordanian forces from the West Bank. Importantly, the Israelis were left in sole control of Jerusalem. Another war is the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Yom Kippur War of 1973. The sporadic fighting that followed the Six-Day War again developed into full-scale war in 1973. Okay, on October 6, the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, thus Yom Kippur War, now Israel was attacked by Egypt across the Suez Canal and by Syria on the Golan Heights. The Arab armies showed great aggressiveness and fighting ability than in the previous wars, and the Israeli forces suffered heavy casualties. The Israeli army, however, reversed early losses and pushed its way into Syrian territory and enriched the Egyptian Third Army by crossing the Suez Canal and establishing forces on its West Bank. Israel and Egypt signed a ceasefire agreement in November and peace agreement on January 18, 1974. The accords provided for Israeli withdrawal into the Sinai west of the Midla and Gidi passes, while Egypt was to reduce the size of its forces on the east bank of the canal. A UN peacekeeping force was established between the two armies. The agreement was supplemented by another, signed on September 4, 1975. On May 31, 1974, Israel and Syria signed a ceasefire agreement that also covered separation of their forces by a UN buffer zone and an exchange of prisoners of war. On May 26, 1979, Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty, formally ending the state of war that had existed between the two countries for 30 years. Under the terms of the Camp David Accords, as the treaty was called, Israel, okay, now, under the terms of the Camp David Accords, as the treaty was called, Israel returned the entire Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and in return, Egypt recognized Israel's rights, to exist. The two countries subsequently established normal diplomatic relations. Now, let us look at another war. Another war is called the Lebanon War of 1982. Lebanon War of 1982. On June 5, 1982, less than 6 weeks after Israel's complete withdrawal from the Sinai, increased tension between Israelis and Palestinians resulted in the Israelis bombing of Beirut and southern Lebanon. When the Palestinian Liberation Organization (PLO) had a number of strongholds, the following day, Israel invaded Lebanon, and by June 14, its land forces reached as far as the outskirts of Beirut, which was encircled, but the Israeli government, agreed to halt its advance and began negotiations with the PLO. After much delay and massive Israeli shelling of West Beirut, the PLO evacuated the city under the supervision of multinational forces. Eventually, Israeli troops withdrew from West Beirut, and an Israeli army had withdrawn entirely from Lebanon by June 1985. Thus, in July 2006, Hezbollah launched an operation against Israel in an attempt to pressure the country into releasing Lebanese prisoners, killing a number of Israeli soldiers in the process and capturing 2. Israel launched an offensive into southern Lebanon to recover the captured soldiers. The war lasted 34 days but left more than 1,000 Lebanese soldiers and about 1 million others displaced. Several Arab leaders criticized Hezbollah for inciting the conflict. Nevertheless, Hezbollah's ability to fight the Israel Defense Forces to a standstill won its praise throughout much of the Arab world. Okay, now let's not forget the war that is happening in Middle East right now. I am talking about the Arab-Israeli crisis. Is actually, the world leaders are playing politics with that war. The world leaders are playing politics with that war. Now, Iran actually has, a very good understanding with Russia. Now, Iran is supporting Hezbollah. Okay, in fact, is Iran that is actually funding Hezbollah as well as Hamas. Now, Russia and Iran actually has a very good rapport. Now, don't forget that US also has a very soft spot for Israel. Now, all these superpowers, these 2 superpowers actually do not want the war to end. And that is why they are just playing hanky-panky with lives of innocent civilians that are being killed on a daily basis. I still call on the UN to still look into that, what is happening, what is happening in Middle East, and ensure to actually, to solve the problem as soon as they can. Thank you very much.